Hello and welcome back, everybody. My name is Mandy Tice. I'm a classically trained painter, and I have been working on this online series that I'm streaming live every morning at 9 a.m. And this week, our current project rather, is painting the sphere en grisaille, which means painting in black and white. So, welcome everybody. Good to see you. We've had some interesting weather all over the country lately. I know last week we talked about environments, and I wanted to let you know that where I am in the New York City area, we got a fair amount of snow, and I have a light on an angle, right? And so my light is covered in snow, which is diffusing the light on the sphere. So it is slightly different, but it's actually more subtle today than it has been last week when we were working. But again, just always being mindful of your environment, what's going on in your environment, and how is it affecting what you're seeing, especially if you're working from natural light. So good morning from Pennsylvania. Good morning, Claudine. Please say hello in the chat. Let me know where you're coming in from. I hope you had a lovely weekend. Um, excuse me. I'm so close to getting rid of this coat. I have onions everywhere. Don't worry. And if you're wondering, if you're new and joining us and you're wondering why I'm talking about onions, I recently learned that if you have like half cut onions, that it can help you with your cough. So I've been I've been doing that. So if you're like, what is this crazy lady talking about? That is why. Welcome back, Leola. Good to see you again. Okay, so just to review what we did the last 5 days of this project. We have drawn a block in of our sphere with a back plane, a ground plane, and a front plane. We have started painting our background, being mindful of subtle gradients going from dark to light and dark to light here, and going from light to dark on the ground plane here. So keep in mind that form turns in all directions. So if this is the area that's closest to our sunlight, it's going to be brighter, and this area is further away from our sunlight, it's going to be darker. We also talked about the ellipse. The collapsed circle is called an ellipse because the sphere is interrupting the light from hitting our ground plane here. And with our cast shadow, so this is called a cast shadow, the further away from the object it is, the fuzzier it's going to get, and the more light pollution is going to get in there, lightening the value. So those are some things that we discussed last week. Did anybody, I see a lot of returning folks that were hanging out last week. Did anybody wake up over the weekend being like, oh, I should have asked Mandy X, Y, or Z, like something that, you thought about or occurred to you while you were learning last week that you wanted to ask me about? This is a great time to do so. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to work on this front plane, and depending on how painfully slow that I teach that, we might even get into the shadow on the sphere. We'll see how today goes. I try to keep the classes to an hour maximum, and sometimes it's better just to do one thought at a time so that you guys can practice at home. I do encourage you to paint along with me if you can from home. So this is painting en grisaille. This is just black and white on a canvas board. But let's say you don't have paint or you don't have access to paint. Like, get a pencil. We're painting en grisaille just in black and white. Everything that we're doing in paint, you can do in pencil. Do a little sketch at home. So welcome from Virginia. Excuse me. So there's a question in the chat about brushes. So on one hand, I prefer the shape of a brush more than any particular brand of brush. So I like the shape. Why? I'm having a hard time grabbing it. So maybe let's see if you can. This is called a filbert brush. So let me see if I can get it. I'm wearing black, so I'm going to put it in front of the white background. Look what we've been learning, silhouetting. So a filbert is like a flat that has rounded edges. I really find this to be a versatile brush. Those of you who've trained with me before know how much I hate washing brushes. So I tend to paint with just one or two brushes. And so I need them to be really versatile. I need them to make a sharp edge and a soft edge, and I need them to get into tiny places and big places. So, those are what I'm up to. Um, uh, sorry. It's Monday. I don't that's what I think about when I'm painting a brush. I really like this particular brand. It used to be made by Utrecht, but I believe you can buy them off of Blick now. I am not affiliated with them. I just happen to like these brushes. They're a synthetic brush. And they, have different sizes, but I believe this series that are filberts have the yellow mark. So that's a good way to think about it. And thank you, Frankie, for being here. And yes, I'm so glad that I'm able to share this knowledge with you all. I'm streaming on this platform. This is new for me. And I want to thank all of you for being here and participating with us. If you are enjoying these free classes, I hope you consider joining our online atelier. So I teach online. So it's similar. I give classes like I'm giving now, but also you get individual feedback from me. So as you're working on your project, you can upload them and I can help guide you and critique you and coach you through the projects so that your learning can really accelerate. If that's something you're interested in, please check out schoolofatelierarts.com and look at our online classes. It's available there. The online class is called our Atelier, as in like yay, painting bootcamp. So I hope you check it out. Please make sure to like and subscribe to this channel. It helps us reach more people like you who might be looking for this free training. So thank you for your support. Thank you for being here. And I am really excited to jump back into this project. I was actually all excited all weekend. I'm like, oh, I can't wait to go back and do this. I've been really enjoying working with all of you in this format and streaming and having this great camaraderie, getting to answer your questions and, not just be painting alone in my studio all day. I'm a more social painter than most, I think. Okay, so back to what we're doing today. We're going to start, excuse me. Sometimes I feel like so dramatic. I'm like, oh, consumption, right? Because I've been sick for a few weeks. I was watching some historical dramas over the weekend. Don't mind me. Okay, so this front plane here. All right, so whenever you're painting, be thoughtful and be decisive. And I'm going to ask you guys to participate in the chat, okay? And it's really important for your learning that you give honest guesses, because when you commit to a guess, when you type it into the chat, then it helps you learn better because you're committing to a choice and not falling prey to, oh yeah, I was close enough, or oh, I don't remember what I guessed, right? So we're gonna play a numbers game. And again, with our value scale, 9 is our darkest. So we have a 9 underneath the sphere here. That's our darkest, and 1 is our lightest. Now, we are looking at this part of our painting, and a few things to know about this part of our painting. This is our front plane. So just to review, this is our back plane here. Our ground plane is down here where the ball is sitting on. And this is our front plane here. Now, it's a little tricky. I'm actually going to tape this down a little bit better because I don't want to confuse anybody unnecessarily. So we want to focus on just this front plane. And our first question, and I'm going to ask you in the chat, and I want you to tell me, even if you're wrong, please be brave in the chat. And if you're feeling a little intimidated in the chat, just write it down on a piece of paper. Like if you're not ready or if you don't have a sign in or whatever, just write it down on some paper, but commit to an answer here. All right, so the first question that I want you to tell me about in the chat is this front plane overall lighter or darker than the ground plane, right? So when you squint your eyes, is the front plane lighter than what the ball is sitting on or darker than what the ball is sitting on? So this front plane, is it lighter or darker than the ground plane? Let me know in the chat. Be brave, my dear friends. Oh, so much bravery in the chat. You guys are making me proud. Excuse me. I'm waiting for our Facebook friends to chime in too. I see a lot of people on YouTube giving their messages. I'm looking for our Facebook friends as well. Okay, yes. Yes. I see a lot of the correct answer in the chat. It is darker. All right. Now, our next question is how much darker? Like if you had to overall give this front plane a number where 1 is the lightest and 9 is the darkest, like what value? Give me your best guess in the chat. Like, what value are we getting on this front plane? Is it hitting the light directly? Is it in shadow? If it's in light, how much light is it getting? If it's in shadow, how dark is that shadow? So actually, maybe my well, no, it's okay. Let's just apply a number to this front plane. Give me your best guess. So much bravery in the chat. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. All right. Now, in order to really establish how dark it is, we also want to decide, is this front plane receiving light or is it in shadow? Right. And it's kind of tricky because what's happening in this particular setup is that excuse me. Um, what's happening in this particular setup is that our light is coming from this direction, right? So like arrow in here, pow, right? And so it's hitting here and it's hitting here and it's being interrupted by the sphere and not hitting underneath here, which is creating the cast shadow, right? But this plane is actually turned away from the light. The light's coming from here. So the only way that this front plane can receive light is if light is bouncing from other places. Now, I'm not sure if you can see, but I have a white piano here in my studio, and it can reflect quite a bit of light, back up here. So my environment is bouncing a fair amount of light in here, but overall, this is actually a shadow plane. It is turned away from the light. It is not receiving. I mean, you could make the argument that it's receiving the tiniest sliver of light because the width of my window might just barely be getting in here. But when you squint your eyes, do you see how this front plane groups with the shadows and not with the lights? Last week, we had talked about squinting our eyes really, really, really tight and then just barely opening them, right? And so when I squint my eyes really, really tight, and I ask myself, if I had to choose, does this belong in the shadow land or the light land? It would belong in the shadow land. Now, that being said, it is receiving a lot of bouncing light um, in here. So it's a shadow, but it's a really what we call flooded shadow. So it's lighter than our typical shadows, but it's still a shadow. So I actually saw a great guess in here from Claudine. Congratulations. I'm going to agree with you on your 6.5. All right. So well done. And I see a lot of guesses that we're leaning a little bit on the lighter side. Can you see when you squint your eyes why it's a little bit darker, that it groups with the shadow and not with the light? So look how much darker it is from our top plane here, or our ground plane, sorry. I know it's confusing, but ground plane and top plane are interchangeable. I try to be consistent and just use ground plane. But some people will say front plane, top plane, back plane. But I typically use ground plane because I feel like it makes more sense. Like that's what it's grounded on. Yeah, woo woo to Claudine and your support from your fellow classmates here. So little victories for all, right? Don't take these little victories for granted. These are big things. You're training your eye to see things at a more nuanced level than most people can see them, right? When you get atelier training, your eye is actually, your optic nerve is an extension of your brain. When you get atelier training, you are physically transforming your brain. Like you are actually training your eyes to see more than other people can see, right? Like it's actually magic. I'm convinced it's magic because when you take the time to answer these questions, when you give your guesses, when you commit to your answers in the chat, it's training your eye more and more. And even if your guess is off, you committed to something and then you have to evaluate, well, why was it off? And the next time, guess what? You're going to be a little bit closer and a little bit closer until you have like a fully atelier trained eye. People think so often that, oh, the problem with my training is that I'm making the wrong brush stroke or I have, the wrong brush, that it's something with my hand. But the hand is just the tiniest percentage of what atelier training really is. At its heart, atelier training is training your eye. If you can see well, it doesn't matter if it's oil paint or drawing or watercolor or oil pastel or any other medium, right? What matters is that your eye is trained to see in a nuanced way extremely well, and that your materials, you can execute that in any material you want, but it's really your eye that we're training, not your hands. Okay, well, I'm getting off my soapbox now. That was that was like a good huzzah speech situation. And welcome, Dennis from New Jersey. Yes, I don't think I'm too far from you if you're in North New Jersey. And yes, it's very snowy here. Okay, so what we're going to do, I'm seeing this mostly, I would say 6.5. We do have a little bit here. This cloth is bumping up here, but I just want to ignore this. I don't want this detail. I'm debating about whether I want to tape it down even. Um, I don't want stuff in my way, right? I just want an even plane going across there. Now, typically things that are closer to our light source are lighter, things that are further away from our light source are darker, but this plane is turned pretty evenly away from the light, and I'm getting a fairly even. I mean, it might start more like at 6.25 and go to 6.5, but it's not making a big movement from left to right, just from the circumstance of the environment and where the lighting is and how this ledge is turned away from the light. So I'm gonna grab my paint palette. I'm a professional artist and I know the difference between an easel and a palette. I'm gonna grab a brush here. I'm gonna go grab a brush here. Oh, welcome from Sweden. I'm honored to have a Swede amongst us. I am going to grab a big brush. You want a brush proportionate to your space. You'll see that so far in this entire project, I've only used 2 brushes, a bigger brush and a little brush. We've covered this, but I hate washing brushes. I despise it. And actually recently, I was told of a system where you can just keep your brushes in a little bit of linseed oil and never wash them. And I've started doing that and it's magical and amazing. And it has changed my painting life. I love it because I hate washing brushes. All right, so that's a little side thing. Okay, so I'm gonna paint across here. It's the tiniest bit lighter on this side than it is on that side. Again, my palette, 1 is our lightest, black is our 9, 1 to 9. When you're mixing a palette, mix the halfway color first, okay? So often students mix palettes that tend to skew really dark. It'll be like really, really, really dark and then suddenly get white up here. So you want even increments of change between your values. You don't want it to be like dark, a tiny bit lighter, tiny bit lighter, tiny bit lighter, tiny bit whiter, white, right? Like even steps of change, even steps of change. I'm being a little dramatic this morning. And good morning from Massachusetts. Welcome, Sheila. So glad to have you here. I bet you guys also got some snow. All right, so excuse me. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick my 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm just going to put a little bit down and see how I feel about it because that feels pretty dark. And, when I'm squinting my eyes, I think 6 might actually be a little bit too dark. So I'm going to go to like a 5.5. So for those of you who said 5.5, I don't know if anybody did, but I'm going to go just a little bit lighter here and see how I feel about that. That's feeling pretty good. So even though I put like a 5 down, I put it on top of a 6, and so I'm getting like a 5.5. So instead of starting at 6 and going to 6.5, I'm going to start at 5.5 and go to 6. All right, so I'm going to put it down, and I have a problem that I hope that you guys are used to solving with me by now, because I have a value here, and I have a value here, and they need to meet, right? And so the question is, how are they meeting? So I'm going to turn you back here. This value on the front plane is meeting the ground plane, but is it meeting in a really sharp, crisp way, or is it meeting in a soft way? Like how hard is this edge when this color meets that color? So give me like a description of how you think this edge is going to meet in the chat. Is it going to be a crisp edge? Is it going to be a super soft edge? Or is it going to be somewhere in between? And we can even use like a scale of 1 to 9, where like 1 is the crispest edge there is, and 9 is the softest edge. Like you could even make an argument that this gradient is just a really wide edge, which blew my mind the first time I heard it, but it's true. So with 9 being like really, really wide edge and 1 being a really crisp edge, give me a number for what you think the ground plane meeting the front plane might be. Okay, I'm seeing some like good in between, softish. Um, yeah, kind of like an in between. And I agree with you. One thing I want to point out is that edges have so many different ways of being hard and soft. So, this is a really crisp edge that we have painted right now between the sphere and the cast shadow. This is very crisp. This edge here is still on the crisp side, but a little bit softer. Do you see how this is a slightly softer edge than between the sphere and the cast shadow? And then when we were doing this last week, we said that the edge got softer the further away it got. Look how soft and big and wide the edges between the cast shadow and the ground plane here compared to here. So some people think that edges are either hard or soft, but there's a whole range of edges, and I want you to start adapting to those edges. And I'm seeing a great guess from Ellen here with maybe like a 3 if 1 is really sharp and 9 is really soft, that it's slightly softened, but not too soft. So, excuse me. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to meet these 2 edges. Now, because it's been a weekend since we last painted on this, it's likely, let's find out, is this still wet? No, this is dry. So what I need to do is refine the color on this side in order to create an edge, because I need to get from one color to the other here. That's a little bit dark. This part can be really frustrating for students, right? Because you're trying to match something that you already did and maintain the edge work, etc. Okay, and now I'm meeting it with my darker color. And I want to meet it in a way that's not too hard, not too soft. Sometimes it's easiest to just put something down and then work back and forth between the 2 edges. Try to avoid always just going sideways when you're creating an edge, because that kind of creates some lines with your paint handling that feel less believable because it like puts a physical ridge in place. All right. I'm going to kind of just leave that until I get this whole thing painted, and then I'm going to go back and work on my edge. So I'm going to paint from both sides and just try to fill this area. Sometimes, especially when you have a white canvas, we did not do an underpainting. If you want to learn more about underpaintings, I have a lot of video in our online atelier painting bootcamp class. You can learn more about that at schoolofatelierarts.com under online classes. But we didn't do an underpainting. And so what that means is that we're dealing with a white canvas. And anytime you put paint on a white canvas, it's going to feel really, really dark. So sometimes it's really useful to just we call it getting the canvas covered, right? Like just get it covered and then fuss with things. Sometimes students will sit in one little corner of their painting, changing the color over and over and over again, when what they really need to do is fill in the space to evaluate how accurate the color is, because when you have a color in isolation surrounded by white canvas, it skews your perception. Okay. All right, it does get a tiny bit darker as it goes across, so I'm just going to scoot down half a value step to my 6 over here. And I don't want to lose my edge completely. You don't want to lose your drawing, but I'm just pseudo meeting the edge, getting the canvas covered, and then we'll go back and really work this edge. But it's important that you have a plan, right? People just start painting without being mindful, without thinking. If you plan ahead, like, oh, it's starting at number 5.5 and going to 6. And when this edge meets this edge, I'm going to make it like a slightly fuzzy edge, right? So when you have a plan, painting isn't so scary and it isn't so hard. right? You have a plan, you execute the plan. You think it through so that you don't have that frustrating experience of putting wrong colors down and then having to change them over and over and over again. You know, people think that I'm still astonished. People think that as a classically trained painter, I like start in this corner and then just blah, 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 perfectly paint until I get to this corner, right? And that's not at all how anything works. Excuse me. And yes, Ellen's making a good point. Some places are sharper than others. Like the edge isn't necessarily consistent all the way across the board. Okay. All right, so I need to I need to reactivate by matching the color here. That's a little bit on the late side. That's a little bit dark, something in between those two. All right, so I'm just trying to get the canvas covered and I'm starting to meet this edge and just put something down. It's a little dark. I don't want to undo all the work that I did on this ground plane, but I need some wet paint in order to make a soft edge. So I need to reactivate at least the part of this ground plane that's near my All right. Do you see what's happened here? That what was feeling like a straight line is starting to get wonky, right? I feel like the sound effects really help. Let me know your opinion on them. I don't know. I'm like goofy this morning. I don't know what it is about Monday, but we've lost the effect. It's really hard for people to keep an accurate drawing with a soft edge, right? But there's still a specific, we need this to read straight, even if the edge is soft. And that takes a little bit of push pull to get a handle on. So it's like we want the soft edge, but we need it to still feel like it's a straight line. Right, so right now I'm working on the softness of it, but then I'm going to have to reestablish the straightness of it. And it's often a push-pull from one to the other, back and forth. All right, my light is starting to change in my studio, and this is about the time of day where I start getting some direct light in, but it's really exacerbated today because there's all this white snow outside. So even the amount of light it usually reflects into my studio is like hyper exaggerated right now. So I'm going to work on, oh, you know what? I see Peter also is seeing this change in light. So I'm going to put my screens out to block some of this light from, and as Peter pointed out, you can see that I'm starting to cast a shadow on my painting here because of how much pollution, light pollution is coming from an angle that I don't want it to come from. When you're painting, you want one source of light, not like 30 sources of light. So I need to go set up my screen. Man, that snow is intense. Um, all right, I'm still getting a slight shadow, but I just can't beat the snow without a full blackout curtain over those stores over there. So usually my screen suffice, but I learned today, not on a snowy day. Whenever you are moving into a new studio, so this is a new studio space for me. I've only been here a few months. And every season is different. Every um, you know, uh, natural event is going to change your light. So we have just an intense amount of white snow reflecting a crazy amount of light. Like it's like my whole studio is like this jewel box. And so it's clear to me that I'm going to need to invest in some blackout curtains. I used to think that that wouldn't be a problem because it's so inset. Like the light really has to bounce in order to create a shadow here that you're seeing. But it's just crazy. I don't have big enough screens to block out the intensity of that reflected light. I this that's crazy. Anyways, we're gonna and it's also very orange for some reason, and I'm trying to figure out why it's bouncing so orange. Possibly because it's bouncing off my screens as well, which are slightly, they're brownish orange. Fascinating. So I don't want to spend too much time worrying about that, especially because we're working on this front plane today. Um, which I mean, every part of your painting is important, blah, blah, blah. But in the scheme of things, this front plane, as long as we get it feeling like it has a soft edge, feeling like it's in the right value structure. And now that I have it painted, I actually think it's too light. I think I'm going to go back to what we originally said as it being closer to the 6. Because when I squint my eyes, it's not reading dark enough. So, sometimes your gut tells you the right thing. And then when you put it on a white canvas in particular, the white canvas makes things look darker or makes things look too dark. But now that we have it covered, we can make the adjustment and we're going back to our original thought. That's feeling better. Okay, and now I need to fuss with this edge some more. Leola, I'm glad that you like the sound effects. Some people are probably like, "Oh, please just shut up and paint." I don't know. This is what it's actually like in my head when I paint. Like, some people paint. You do make some accommodations when you're painting as a demo, when you're painting as teaching, but these are literally my thought processes. Like, I literally go zoom in my head when I'm painting sometimes. I might need my smaller brush to just get a little bit more refinement on this edge here. Different artists have different tricks. Some will just paint the values in between to create a softer edge. I like to push and pull my edges. I just feel like I have more control over how soft they are that way. But I might need I might need a softer or smaller brush rather. So, the edge, we're creating essentially what's considered a gradient over maybe a half an inch space. So that's why a smaller brush is useful for refining. But as I'm doing this, I want to make sure again that um, that line feels straight and grounded. I don't want a wonky line. So, again, take your time. Atelier painting is all about slowing down, really seeing and executing to the very best of your ability, making it the most perfect that you can. If you ever find yourself being like, "Oh, that's close enough," or "That's good enough," like, that's not a mindset that's gonna help you in atelier training. In atelier training, the mindset is, "How can I make it better? Is that as accurate as I see it? What am I missing?" Being your own self-critic, it really matters. Oh, so there's a question in the chat. Do I ever use my finger to blend or soften? Absolutely not. Never. The reason is a studio safety. So I like to use a lot of original pigments. Some of my pigments, like vermilion red, have mercury in them. Some of the pigments I choose to use are lead based. And so this is my best understanding. And again, the School of Atelier Arts is not responsible for your studio safety practices. It's your job to investigate on your own. But I will share what I best know, and you can use and research that information and confirm it at your leisure. Um, or not, like, do your own research. I can't take responsibility for your studio safety practices. But my understanding is that ground pigment can't permeate a skin. It's too big of particles. But the danger of getting it inside of you is from ingestion, right? So if you touch paint and then touch a coffee cup and then sip your coffee cup, that's a way of ingesting some paint. So I've been very mindful because I do choose to use pigments that are, really, really not good to ingest. um, that I've developed a painting practice where, I mean, you'll see my hands are clean. And I encourage my students in the online painting class as well. As a general rule, if I ever get paint on my hands, I will immediately wash them. This was a really big pain in the butt when I was learning how to paint, but it forced me to develop studio habits, how I paint, how I lay paint on the palette, where I, store my palette, just all those things that keep my studio and my hands in particular very clean. Like, you will not find paint marks all over my studio. I'm not that kind of painter. And so even though it may be easier as a technique to rub, if you're going to do that, please, please, please use gloves and avoid ingestion. I don't use it not because it's not a good technique for getting a soft edge, but because I am so paranoid about eating the pigments that I know I shouldn't be eating. So that's a really good question. I also think, I mean, I think you can have control rubbing with your finger, but I have not used that technique enough to get the results that I want from it. When you're doing tasks like this that don't require so much thought, this is a good time to, plug in um, your podcast, some music, your book on tape, whatever you like listening to. I find that I really struggle to, that got a little dark. My stomach is, I hope you guys don't hear my stomach grumbling. I got distracted this morning and didn't get my breakfast yet, and my stomach is protesting. I hope that you don't hear those grumblings. Um, but there are times that it's just mindless work to do something. You'll find that especially in drawing when you're just filling in a big shadow shape or something. That doesn't necessarily require a lot of brain power, but it does require a lot of time and patience. You want to be careful, especially when you're doing a soft edge, that your drawing doesn't migrate. So even though I'm working on keeping this line straight, it might move up, it might move down. And so you want to make sure that it lands in the correct place overall. I think controlling edges is one of the more challenging aspects of paint handling, but I don't know. I've seen students pick it up, no problem. I've seen students struggle with it for over a year. Um, everybody, it's interesting because especially in an atelier, some you're going to pick up some things really easily and you're going to struggle with others. And the times you pick up the things easily, you're like, "Oh yes, I'm never going to struggle with painting again. Now I know it." Right? I'm good. And then like the next day you're trying a technique that's really hard for you and then you are like, "Oh, I'm never going to be a great painter," right? It's a very dramatic experience to learn how to paint. So, the more that you can just embrace both the ups and the downs, like, "Oh, well, this is hard for me because I'm learning," right? Then it makes it a little easier to get through the hard times. It also helps to have a supportive group of people around you. Learning in isolation can be really challenging. You don't have somebody to bounce ideas off of or whatever. And I would say with our online class that the community that we've developed there is every bit as important as the actual content and the lessons that are in the online class. All right, so I'm happy with the softness of the edge, but it looks like the edge dipped a little bit here. So I'm gonna, oh my gosh, my stomach is being so silly. That feels better. I'm also, because of that crazy reflected light, getting quite a bit of reflection off the strokes of my paint. So the strokes have texture to them, sometimes a lot, sometimes a little. It depends on your canvas and how much paint you're laying down. But these little strokes have little ridges. And when you have a lot of reflected light coming into your studio, it can catch on those and become a distraction. So something else to be mindful of. All right. So I'm just evaluating how I feel about that. And I think I'm gonna, well, it's just a little bit. Ah, dang it. All right. I think I'm gonna call that good. I'm just gonna give you guys a look. So when you're looking at the setup, squint your eyes. It does feel like it could go a touch lighter just on the side here. Um, But I don't know, it's reading slightly different on your screen than I'm reading it in life. When I squint in life, it's feeling just a touch darker than the what is on the screen. So I'm gonna go with what I'm actually seeing. I think the camera is picking up some of that reflected light from the snow that we were talking about earlier. Okay. So I kind of teased that we might get into painting the sphere today. I was wrong. Tomorrow we're going to work on this core shadow in the sphere. And again, we start slow so we can finish fast. And the idea, hopefully, will be by the time we actually start painting the sphere, that it'll start emerging just because we did everything around it the right way. Um, okay, so Thank you all for joining us today to learn about our sphere painting. I hope that you're learning a lot and that you're following along at home. Please make sure to join our newsletter. You can do so at schoolofatelierarts.com. I send out free lessons and other exclusive art things exclusively through the email list. You're not going to get them anywhere else. So you don't want to miss out. Our wildly popular newsletter is popular for a reason. And I hope you'll join us for the newsletter as well to learn about our secret classes. Um, okay. That is all for today, everybody. Thank you for being here. And I really appreciate you joining us for this little art learning adventure. And I hope to see you tomorrow. Have a good day, everybody.